and started punching and trying to drag a driver out of his car. That's another big thing, and we've seen other cases arise throughout the last day. So it's really kind of crazy. The looting, what seems to happen here, the looting in Minneapolis started on Wednesday night at the Target on Lake Street and 26th. The store is located across the street from the Minneapolis Police Department's 3rd Precinct, where Derek Chauvin, the police officer who killed George Floyd, worked. And thank God that is past tense. Based on Twitter accounts and local news reports, it seems relatively easy to figure out how this started. The protesters marched to the 3rd Precinct and, after smashing the shit out of it, decided to smash the shit out of other major retail stores across the street and help themselves do some free stuff. Many see looting as a red line in America, which is strange considering that the Boston Tea Party forms a core part of our foundational method. By the way, the circumstances of the Boston Tea Party were a lot more dubious than what we see going on right now. Like, it was just like, I think that if I remember from A-Push correctly, like, it was just really a back and forth that was started by a drunken tavern guy. That was the Boston Massacre, but I don't know if the Tea Party was responsible about it. Whatever. Let's not get bogged down in some AP history. We will be talking about that on our Global History podcast. But that is a very, very disturbing and very, very telling situation of how we view ourselves and how we view who can do what and what different ways that our people are going to be allowed to protest and the way they should handle themselves. The discourse around the protest in general, how it should be done, who's allowed to do it, is already a fertile ground for race and class resentment, but there's absolutely nothing that causes widespread hysterics and dismay like the image of a black or brown person carrying a fresh TV box out of a store without a receipt. Let's pretend for a minute that people like John Miller, conservative pundit, saying things like, why is this a reaction to someone's death to loot a Minneapolis Target? It's simply an excuse to act like heathens. Let's pretend for a minute at least that Miller's question is genuine, despite the fact that he's a Twitter guy whose bio says objective journalist and feed is mostly retweets of conservative people like Tucker Carlson, who literally has had probably some of the worst, just evil responses about this. Like, pretty much going out to say, I mean, police murdering people in broad daylight in the street is one thing, but a billion-dollar corporation having a few windows in one of its store broken, that is something that is worse than everything. Like, we cannot have that. Target, whose like CEO is probably a billionaire or pretty close, multi-millionaire, losing out on some profit, that's going to be, that is the something that cannot stand. That threatens the very foundational core of this country. It's a very, very interesting way of looking at it. Like, I saw a tweet, it was like, Jeff Waldorf, I think, said this on Twitter. I don't know who needs to hear this, but Target will be fine, folks. I think Target will be fine. The answer seems to me that looting is a way of exerting control over situations, securing direct material gains for yourself or your community in an environment that presents a constant risk to your life, livelihood, or your sanity. It's opportunistic and somewhat violent, to be sure, but in the context of the environment, it makes sense. There's a reason comfortable Americans don't lose their crap every time Rick Grimes filches a can of beans on The Walking Dead. What they don't realize is that for many groups of people, the structure of America is just as dangerous as the hordes of zombies that plague the characters on The Walking Dead. Target, AutoZone, Dollar Tree, Cub Foods, all the businesses are emblematic of and supported by the system of white supremacy, which passes pain and violence into poorer and browner communities through institutions constructed to ensure that the people of America was designed for can live their lives unfettered by inconvenience or fear. These businesses are also not people, as Ashley Reese points out in Jezebel. Property is inanimate, it can't breathe, it doesn't have hopes, dreams, mouths, or mouths to feed. There are properties we cherish, our homes, our places of worship, buildings of historical and cultural significance. A Target's not any of these places, and neither is an Arby's, a Wendy's, an Aldi, or an AutoZone, or an empty construction site. It is safer to say that an aforementioned establishments are better insured than many Americans. That's a pretty good point as well. For far too many Americans, it's easier to mourn the destruction of a series of chain stores owned and operated by millionaires than the death of a black American. A stolen lamp is worthy of the kind of empathy that a black person could only dream of. A TV set is stolen from a billion-dollar corporation. Like, it's kind of pretty crazy. Like, what will we do? Target will never survive. I mean, I think it's really what is an expression of just like anger and just fear and just a sense of just absolute chaos and disorder, and the fact of like, what the hell is going on? Our world is falling apart, and it's just like, it's just an kind of almost instinctive and really kind of base instinct to just, and it's definitely not the prettiest thing. It's definitely not the nicest thing by any stretch of the imagination, but I think really what it is just a need to kind of come in and cry out and just be like, please, like, something needs to happen here, like, really. Yeah, and I think that's a very important note, I think, to take under consideration. And as Common Dreams reports, the reaction from some of the progressive heroes, I think, have been very interesting, gathering attention to a story that we have talked about, but I think it should be talked about a hell of a lot more. As protests in Minneapolis and other U.S. cities over the police killing of George Floyd turned violent overnight, resulting in damage to some storefronts and buildings, complaints about looting sparked backlash from progressives who pointed to the billions in wealth accumulated by corporations and the super rich in the 3 months alone as the country grapples with the coronavirus pandemic. Americans know who the real looters are, progressive radio host Benjamin Dixon told Common Dreams. It's the billionaires who plundered America for $434 billion with the pandemic, in the pandemic, while the essential workers keeping our country afloat barely make over a minimum wage. And I think that's a really good way of putting it. Like, what is a greater injustice? Like, billionaires like Jeff Bezos profiting off of keeping essential workers down and paying them, abandoning their hazard pay, putting them in these unsafe conditions with minimal protective equipment, profiting to the tunes of billions of dollars, while these people put their lives on the line and their families' lives on the line and their health on the line, all for a paltry sum of money. Like, what is the greater injustice? That or one Target store being, like, set afire? Like, I ask you. I think we can really tell the answer there. So-called riots exploded on the street of Minneapolis on Wednesday during the second day of protests against the city's police department for killing Floyd, who died after Officer Derek Chauvin knelt on his neck for at least 10 minutes despite Floyd's pleas that he couldn't breathe. Protests against the killing in LA and Memphis also resulted in violence in Los Angeles. The violence was participated by police officers driving their cars into demonstrators. That was another crazy, like, there's been so many crazy videos, I haven't even been, like, time to talk about them all in this segment of our show. Like, we've seen some absolutely crazy things happen, and it's just absolutely horrific. Like, there's a video of a guy, like, there's videos of, like, police cruisers running over people or coming very, very close to really seriously running over and hurting people, and then the chyron on the TV screen on the bottom will say, "Protesters damage police vehicle." Like, it's insane. It's absolutely insane. Yeah, as It's Going Down News and Unicorn Riot reported, demonstrators are fed up with this racist system and see the movement as part of a broader organic uprising. This is just the start, tweeted It's Going Down News. I don't know what that fine institution is. I think they've just been kind of on the ground and posting a lot of videos about that, which is definitely a very good thing, for sure. Progressives pointed to the disconnect between the condemnation of those acts and a lack of critical reaction to the country's richest people and corporations gaining billions of wealth since the beginning of the coronavirus. Like, you can be mad at all the looters that you want, but you cannot deny that this is, by any stretch of the imagination, a greater injustice. This fact that the American billionaires got $434 billion richer during the pandemic. That is something that we just cannot overlook. This is something that we can't pretend. Like, if you have any kind of trouble, like, determining what is worse about this, like, I don't know how I can really help you with this. Absolutely terrible to hear about all the looting right now, said journalist Katie Aronoff. Wednesday night, or Kate Aronoff, Aronoff of the, I believe, Intercept, tweeted Wednesday night linking to a report of the billionaire's increase in wealth. Someone should intervene. I do agree. Someone really should. Progressive activist Peter Dow chimed in sarcastically, voting calls for more looting. For no more looting, to make an even broader point about who's benefiting from the pandemic and putting Wednesday's events in context. I heard there was looting, and I'm furious, said Dow. Republicans and Democrats stealing from the border ballot duration the hashtag pandemic. That kind of theft is unacceptable. Yeah, a lot of people kind of making, I mean, I guess you could kind of call them jokes, but other progressives on social media has also made the distinction between demonstrators angry at decades of police brutality and the billionaire class adding obscene levels of wealth in the pandemic off of the expense of people and everyday people. So, yeah, I think that's really quite clear. The ruling elite have used our own civility to control us while robbing America blind, says Benjamin Dixon, but we're hip to their game. So definitely true. Owen Higgins there with the quotes from progressives in Common Dreams. And it's really it's really, really crazy. And it just shows you that, like, there's just the fundamental way that we view things in this country is just really so wrong and disturbing. Yeah, there's definitely no doubt about that. And this is kind of a dreadful familiar scene that's playing out in Minneapolis. And while right-wing protesters like the Reopen gangs are rampaging across the state capitals the past few weeks can essentially do whatever they want without the fear of violence from cops. And by the way, this wasn't just the protesters being violent. Like, the cops have, I think they started the violence, they escalated the violence in a big way. That's something that I think should not be ignored in any stretch of the imagination. Like, this is a real part of it. That we see take place time and time again. Like, these are the factors that so few people actually talk about in between videos controlling over all the looting that we see and the protests that we see. Yeah, Black Lives Matter protesters don't have the same luxury of kind of talking to the media and the media kind of discussing and hand-wringing about whether are there grievances legitimate. Like, is this a real thing? Like, should we be concerned about this protest? Like, no. Like, that does not happen with Black Lives Matter protesters. They get tear gas. The media focuses on the arson, the anger. The local coverage in Minneapolis cannot get enough of the looting of damage to a police precinct in AutoZone without getting to the politics beneath that anger. Politicians can't even say the right words to try and placate the media as they claim to be in touch with the most. After the initial conversation comes the next phase. Coverage comes the next phase. The conversation about what is to be done. That's happening now in places like the New York Times, and they're depicting reining in the Minneapolis cops as an uphill, probably futile battle, citing the fact that the Minneapolis's own police chief once sued the department for its discriminatory practices, and there is a long history of awful practices by the Minneapolis Police Department, who has been well known, I think, for, like, even in the standard of being American police department, even in the standard of American police departments being very, very bad. An admission. This is really kind of generally speaking the best that we can kind of possibly hope for. An admission that this problem exists and always has existed. The fact that we have dealt with really bad stuff, not we, but the people in Minneapolis, especially the African-American people in Minneapolis, have dealt with this problem. But this really does not mean the problem has to exist. You can argue that other levels of the criminal justice system, such as the incarceration policy and the political leanings of the state and local courts and DA's offices, are slowly changing, with the cops and especially cop unions refuse to budge. When prosecutors and mayors even gesture at criticism, let alone reform, they attack. When given a range of choices, they offer the most reactionary. When faced with evidence of the problem, they refuse to admit it exists. That is because they haven't had to. The cops are a special interest group along with your local real estate magnates and Chamber of Commerce. They're one of the most powerful in your area. They've whipped everyone from the city council to your U.S. senators into shape, to the point where Amy Klobuchar, former presidential candidate who's struggling badly with black voters and was very publicly vying for a promotion, VP Joe Biden, couldn't do anything more than flail out the right words when she tried to talk about Floyd's killing, because that is so, like, even the most democratic people, like, for example, Andrew Cuomo, Bill de Blasio, they are still very much under the influence of the very, very powerful police unions in this country. And that is something that we have to take really into account here. Looming over all of this is the growing movement to abolish the police entirely.